Welcome back. Welcome to the AGM for the Essex Wildlife Trust for this year. This is our second AGM digitally. Last year we did it and it seemed to work okay, so we're going to do the same again. So you can listen from the comfort of your own home. We did consider doing a face-to-face event and we obviously would have preferred that, but I think it makes sense to do it digitally and there's a lot of benefits in doing it. So welcome everyone. I'm afraid I have to start the AGM this year on a rather somber note, and that's obviously deeply disappointing for me personally. I have to report that the Trust's former chair, Mike Sanderson, tragically died earlier this week following an accident at home. Now, those of you who knew Mike are understandably shocked and deeply saddened at this news. Mike started as a volunteer at the Trust in 1997, and over the next 20 years, he had various roles at the Trust. He was chair of Malden Local Group. He was warden of Hall Wood, assistant warden and committee member of Tollsbury. He was a committee member of Blue House Farm. He was a trustee, and most noticeably, he was the chair of the board until he retired in 2016. Mike was a very calming figure. He was a consummate diplomat, and he was a great business head. I always find that he was a very softly spoken guy. He was, very, very reassuring to me. And he had a sort of steely resolve, if you like, because if there was any threat to the Trust, its staff or its volunteers, he was straight in there protecting our best interests. And that was a great quality of his. Everyone thought he was quite a soft person, but actually he was very clear if anyone threatened the Trust, and he was very protective of the Trust. Mike was a huge support to me personally. When I joined the Trust, he was there for my first year as chief executive. And it's not easy being chief executive, and it's not easy being the chair. But he was always quick with a very reassuring word, with a nod, with a wink, and his cheeky grin. And you always knew that he had your back. So the success of the Trust today is in no small part to those 2 decades that Mike gave of passion, of commitment, and of incredible leadership, particularly through a period of transition for the Trust. And we should celebrate Mike's input over those 2 decades. Obviously, it goes without saying that our thoughts and condolences are obviously with Mike's family during this extremely challenging time. Very sad. He was a great man. But Mike was the chair and he would want me to get on with business. If he was here, he would be saying this is an important part of the Trust business that we have to get on. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce our president, Professor Jules Pretty, who will be chairing the meeting. For those of you who aren't already aware, Jules is a very esteemed author. He's a presenter, he's a senior academic, professor of environment and society at the University of Essex. And the Trust is certainly very proud and very fortunate to have him as our president. Now, Jules has inspired us on many occasions with his insights regarding the various complexities and the interactions between humans and the natural world. And I'm myself very excited and intrigued, probably as the rest of you, to hear what Jules has to say today as he shares his thoughts this morning. So Jules, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And so sorry to hear the news about Mike. We all feel very sad about that. I'm going to kind of launch straight into my opening talk before we begin the AGM formally. And it's, as the title says, it's really about how our ways of living affect our well-being, can affect nature, and can then also affect the climate crisis. And we're kind of pretty aware of all of those as challenges. Those crises of climate and biodiversity are getting worse, as we've heard with some of the presentations earlier this morning. But there are ways of living that make us happy and healthy and are low carbon. That's the kind of headline behind this. So they give us options of the sorts of things that we might choose to do, regardless of how well governments and others are acting in those with those things in mind. Since I last spoke at the 2020 AGM, things have actually got worse. The heat dome over the northwest of the United States was unprecedented, 40-degree temperatures over the Siberian permafrost, the hottest day ever recorded in the world in Death Valley at 56 degrees. And amounts of carbon dioxide still increasing in the atmosphere by 2 parts per million. So we're at 417 now. 350 was a safe place for humanity. We can manage that. That was 1990. That was when we passed that. So just 31 years ago, that's how quickly things have unraveled. I'm actually quite optimistic because I think our actions can change things quickly, but we've got to do it in this 30-year period that we find in front of us. And the challenge is kind of simple, really. We've got to halve our emissions across the planet in the first 10 years, halve them again, and then halve them again. And if we did that, that would be enough. That actually would do. We would be in a safe place for humanity. So that suggests large changes, but also the largest ones in the decade that we find ourselves in at the moment. Now, during the last year, we at the University of Essex undertook a global survey of the good life. You'll be familiar with the phrase, but actually it's very familiar in lots of other languages. When vivir is actually written into the constitutions of Colombia and Bolivia, some countries have taken the idea of a good life very seriously. Huger in Denmark, ikigai in Japan, huashengho in China, all mean a good life. And we found remarkable consistency actually across 2,000 responses from 27 countries. And there were 6 priorities that people said were the most important things for a good life. They were healthy food, togetherness, being with other people, regular daily connectedness to nature, physical activity, personal growth and learning, a kind of lifelong learning, new things happening in life, and a spiritual and ethical coherence, a kind of wrapper that puts around all of those things. And then when we do consume, it should be sustainable consumption. Now, the interesting thing about all of those is they're good for health and happiness and also happen to be low carbon. So we've got an opportunity to achieve 2 ends with the same action. And that kind of leverage is one of the reasons why I think we can be a bit optimistic as we look into the depths of the challenges we face. I'm going to come to the sort of options that you might choose and how we might go about doing it in just a moment. But they are around, let me remind you, food, togetherness, nature, being active, personal growth, and a spiritual and ethical framework to wrap it all together, to give meaning to our lives. We can name that in whatever way we want to do. So the interesting principle is that we can do things for a good life, and then the assets, the natural, social, and human assets, are still there afterwards. Normally, under kind of modern consumption, when we consume things, we use them up. But when you listen to the birds, when you watch a sunset, when you sit on the beach, when you go for a walk through the countryside or through a reserve, you don't use up the assets, the capital, to use another kind of language. So we were able to consume, to use that kind of language, these things. They have an impact upon our well-being, but they're still there afterwards. And that's an interesting kind of twist as well, this leverage that we have in front of us. So the key question would be then, well, what choices do we have? Well, first of all, I think we should be saying, especially with the COP beginning in Glasgow, the Conference of the Parties beginning at the end of next week, it is the responsibilities of governments to act. It is also the responsibility of companies, businesses, public agencies, charities also to act. There are things that they and we can do that we as individuals can't do. We need investments in renewable energy, for example. So noting that, there is still a raft of options available to each of us that we could take on to help reduce our own carbon footprints and get them towards, my target for the world would be 1 ton per person for 7.8 billion people would be enough. So the average in the UK is 7. So each of us need to get from 7 to 1 ton. So we need 6 1-ton projects. To give you an idea of the sort of options in front of us, let me just run through some of these. So if you switch to a vegetarian diet, you'll save 0.7 of a ton. If you buy only sustainable and organic food, half a ton. If you buy local food, another half a ton. If you can't give up meat completely, but you have 2 meat-free days a week, that's 0.2 of a ton. So remember, I was saying that we need to find 6 tons to reduce. That gives you a sense that by acting on food and diet, we can begin to make quite a step. Energy is a big area, as we're all aware of in the press. If you switch your electricity supplier to a guaranteed renewable supplier, I'm sure many members of the trust will have done this already. Make sure it's a guaranteed renewables, because some of the big ones are not. 1.5 tons, that's a big leap. Putting on solar panels and photovoltaics, 1 ton to 1.5 tons. An electric vehicle actually will on average save 2 tons per person. If you only cycle, walk and use public transport, another 2 tons. So you can see we've got some options. The bad news about the transport is that flying is pretty awful. It puts a hole through almost everything. Big impacts of flights. A single return flight to New York will be 1.5 tons. A single return flight to the Far East, to Australia, to Beijing, to Japan would be 6 tons. So flying at the moment is pretty awful. We can make lots of benefits on one side, but we might blow them all with flights. Or if we are going to fly, then we need to work harder to get the overall footprint down. Working from home actually saves about 1.3 tons. So we've been doing quite a lot of that already. And then as other examples, the wear 30 times movement, the movement to encourage us when we buy clothes to guarantee we're going to wear them lots of times, to make sure that you aren't just going to wear them once and then buy another one. That would, if you wear stuff at least 30 times, that's going to save you 0.5 ton a year. So quite a lot of options in front of us. And a reminder, though, that some things are worth doing, but they're not impacting a lot on carbon. So if I were to plant 10 trees, it's going to take 10 years to actually save a ton of carbon. So much slower, not fast enough to save the climate, but really beneficial when it comes to biodiversity, to creating habitats, to acting responsibly towards the environment. So we're going to need to think ahead. Carbon's not going to be the only measure, but this is my headline from all of this. Don't think about trying to do all those things at once. Pick one this year, try to do it, and then pick another one for next year, and then pick another one for next year. And between 2022 and 2030, you will have got towards the 6 ton reduction, and that will be making a really substantial impact upon mitigating climate change and indeed reversing it, which is ultimately the thing that we're going to have to do. I finished my talk by just giving a couple of quotes just to show you that these are not exactly new challenges for humanity. In the Tao Te Ching, which was written 2,500 years ago, chapter 33 has a small quote that's been translated in this way: the best things in life are not things. And that was said a long time ago. And there was a recognition that the good life came from those activities, being with others, being in nature, eating healthily. They're the things that, that make us content. And Mary Oliver, the wonderful US poet who died 2 years ago, she wrote a small 7-word poem called Instructions for Living a Life. It was: pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. So if we can be attentive to nature, if we can be astonished about it, see how wonderful it is, and tell other people, then you could say that's probably the first task for all of us in getting the changes towards positive biodiversity and reductions of the effects of climate change. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Jules. As ever, you never fail to inspire or challenge my brain, and I hope he's done the same for you. I love those final quotes that you've just said, and I love some of the statistics that you've come out with. The wear 30 times, I haven't actually heard that myself. So 0.5 ton for wear 30 times. I am now feeling very, very smug because I've got I'm always getting grief from my wife in particular for wearing kind of 20-year-old rugby shirts that look kind of threadbare, but I actually still quite like them. So very smug now. I'm doing something for the planet. I'm going to tell her that next time she has a go at me. Working from home, yes, 1.3 tons. We've all been doing that. So we've all been doing our bit. And the thing about the trees, 10 years, that's really interesting. Great for biodiversity, but it's not going to get where we need to be right this minute in terms of carbon. So, but the take home message from me from Jules's talk there is that we have options. And that's the exciting thing, isn't it? We hear so many things on the news where you think, oh my God, you know, it's all going wrong. We can't possibly make an impact. And Jules has just showed us we can all play our part. There are options there that each of us can do as individuals. So even if the big issue itself seems all too encompassing and too massive, climate change, that's a huge thing. We can each take our personal responsibility. There are options there for us. So wonderful, so inspiring, Jules. Thank you so much for that. So before we get into the actual AGM, I'd just like to explain a few things in terms of the workings, how it will work. And I'll probably read this just so that I get it exactly right. So there will be some items that require a vote, and that will be launched on your screens. Hopefully you're adept at that now. You've been voting on a few polls, so you're used to that now. And each question will have an option, and you can choose whether to vote for, abstain, or against. The question will stay up for a few seconds, and then the count is automatically counted. There are going to be no proposers or seconders because our voting is automatic via the user poll. We've received some online and some postal votes via proxy forms, and those will be added to the screen count. The outcome will then be announced if the motion has been carried. The final numbers will be put online on our website. So if you're really interested to see those, they'll be published in the next few days if you're interested to see those exact figures. So now I'd like to pass back to Jules once more as he chairs the business section of the AGM. Jules, over to you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Marvellous. Good morning, all. I'd like to welcome you all formally to the 62nd annual general meeting of the Essex Wildlife Trust. Thanks very much for attending. Thank you. Most of you, I think, were attending the session before the AGM, so that's marvellous. We've received a number of apologies, online votes and proxy forms. Those votes have been checked and counted by Penny, our independent scrutineer, who's observing today, and she's on hand if we need her. The votes that have been counted and checked will be added to those of the automatic online poll when we get to that. And I'll announce if each item has been passed. Please bear with us for a few seconds while the process is happening. Once you make your vote, you need to press send, then the numbers will be added up and I'll get a secret message over the ether to say what the numbers are, and then I'll say whether the motion's been carried or not. So item 1 of the AGM, ordinary business, is the consideration of the minutes of the AGM held on the 24th of October, 2020. So what I'd like to ask you to do is recall that the minutes were included in your invitation pack. They're also on the website if you need to go back and check those. I'd like to ask you to vote to accept these minutes. You've got your 3 options: for, abstain, and against. You can click on the one you want. So if you could do that with the poll launched, as member, I accept the minutes of the AGM held on the 24th of October as a fair representation of the meeting. So I report that the votes are in: for 82%, abstain 18%, against 0%. So thank you very much. I can therefore announce that the result of the motion is carried. We move on to item 2 on your agenda, which is matters arising. I've been informed that there are no matters arising. Just checking the Q&A, I don't think there's anything that's come up in there. Note the Q&A refers to earlier things. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the questions section at the bottom of your screen where it says Q&A, and we will take some of those later on when I put some questions back to Andrew. So the impact report is item 3 of our agenda today, and this piece was included in your AGM membership pack. This is the hard copy of the impact report. Hopefully you received that. Also available to read online if you want. The main theme of the impact report is the relationship between people and wildlife. A little bit of what I was just talking about in my presentation, and certainly a lot of what you heard about in the piece before the AGM. Particular focus on the great outdoors as the unsung hero of 2020 and all that we've been through, providing a point of access for activity, exercise, recreation, sense of happiness, perspective, and mental and physical health. Actually, all of those things that I mentioned about a good life. I think it became quite sharply apparent to us all of the really important things to us in life during this period of crisis. This return back to nature, or just the emphasis on nature, I think is something that has come quite clearly through to us. As Andrew says in his introduction to the report, it was a year of challenges, also a year of opportunities. Successive lockdowns unlocking a wave of creativity and innovation at the Trust, which was marvellous, some of which we heard about earlier this morning. You can see an overview of the main areas of impact in the centerfold, the lovely infographics that have been designed. You can get a sense of the impacts there. And you can also read an honest account of the main challenges in the good, the bad, and the ugly section, where the Trust acknowledges there's still much to do to elevate thinking and delivery to the level at which we will meet the challenges we're going to be facing in the future. Therefore, I'm commending this report to you as a true reflection of the activity undertaken in 2020. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to our Treasurer, Bob Holmes, who will undertake to briefly explain item 4 on the agenda, the consideration of the financial statements for the period of 2020. Bob's going to give a little bit of a presentation, a few slides, whilst he introduces this, and we'll come back to taking the impact report and a financial statement for the year at one time in the vote after Bob. So thank you very much for that. Handing over to Bob. Bob, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Jules, and good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here again for my second year as the Trust Treasurer to let you know what happened to the Trust finances in 2020. And as you can probably imagine, it was quite a year. And there's some big changes compared with some of the figures that for 2019 that I showed you last year. But despite everything, it was a successful year financially for the Trust, and the Trust has ended it in a stronger position than ever before. So can I have my first slide, please? This first slide summarises the income and expenditure of the Trust and its 4 subsidiaries compared with last year. And you can see on the top line there that the income for the Trust actually increased last year by £600,000 to £10 million, while expenditure went down £1 million from £8.4 to £7.4 million. Consequently, our operating surplus was £2.6 million. That's £1.6 million more than in 2019. And I'll go into the main reasons behind those changes in my next couple of slides. But this slide also shows on the 4th line the net changes in the value of the Trust's long-term investments and its pension liabilities. Now, investment markets had a roller coaster year in 2020. They fell a lot in the first 3 months as the pandemic took grip, but progressively recovered as those early losses as governments around the world took action to protect their economies. And by the end of the year, when vaccines were starting to be rolled out, our investments have not only recovered all of their earlier losses, but were actually worth more than at the start of the year, giving us a gain of £700,000 overall. And although that's not as big as the exceptionally large gain we saw last year, nonetheless, that we had a total investment return of over 9% in the year. That includes our investment income, which is a very satisfying result in all the circumstances. So adding those gains on the investment to our operating surplus saw our funds increase by over £3 million last year, from just under £30 million to over 33 by the end of the year. And I'll go into a little bit more detail as to what they comprise towards the end of my presentation. We'll move on to the next slide. This slide shows where the income came from and how much there was in 2020, that's the green bar on the left, compared with the previous 2 years. 2019 was blue and 2018 was the orange. And the big change which jumps out from this is in the second set of bars. And that's the income which we received from grants, donations and legacies, which at just under £4.5 million was 90% more than in 2019. But within that total, the income we got from grants and donations was actually £500,000 less than in 2020 than in 2029, because 2019 saw the majority of the grant funding for the new Langdon Discovery Centre, Nature Discovery Centre come in. So the overall increase in that set of bars was accounted for from legacy income. And we were very fortunate last year to have received a total of £3.7 million of legacy income, compared with just £1 million in 2019, an extra 2.6 million. That total included one exceptionally large legacy of £2.1 million, part of which is a property, a company called Stone Hall near Great Dunmow. And that legacy is designated for specific activities, mainly in the area of education, either at or near to Stone Hall. But even without this, we were fortunate to have received substantially more than in 2019. And obviously, we would very much like to acknowledge our grateful thanks to everyone who's donated to the Trust in this particular way. But the other big change that is you can see from this slide is in the fourth set of bars, where there's a big drop in income compared to the previous year. And that's the income earned by our trading companies, our 2 trading companies, which is around about half the level of 2019. Essex Wildlife Sales was particularly badly hit by the pandemic, as nature discovery centres had to close for a lot of the year. And even when they were able to start reopening in summer of 2020, they couldn't operate at full capacity. I'm going to come back to the impact that this had on the Trust's net surplus in a couple of slides' time. But looking at the other sources of income, the first, well, they were stable, relatively stable, despite the pandemic. The first set of bars is the income from membership and fundraising. And although our fundraising activities were much reduced, membership income held up well, as did our membership numbers, even if having to curtail our recruitment activities meant that we didn't achieve the growth in membership that we had targeted at the start of the year. The middle set of bars is the income attributable to charitable activities, and that rose by around about £100,000, but that was partly the result of £200,000 of grants, COVID-19 support grants we received from local government. And the final small set of bars on the right, that's income from our investments, which is a very similar level to 2019. Next slide, please. Moving on from the income to the expenditure, you can see here that the major areas of expenditure we incurred. And the first set of bars on the left shows the money the Trust spent in each of the last 3 years on its reserves, conservation and wildlife activities. And I'm pleased to say that despite the pandemic, we spent £100,000 more in this area in 2020 than we did in 2019. And given the difficulties the whole nation experienced in delivering anything during the pandemic, I think this really is a tremendous achievement. But in all other areas, you'll see the expenditure was down in 2020 compared with prior years. The second set of bars, the costs of our nature discovery centres, that came down because obviously the centres were closed for some of the year. The third set of bars, our trading companies, well, they couldn't trade consistently and therefore didn't spend so much. And we didn't, on the right-hand side, the last set of bars, voluntary income and fundraising events, well, we didn't spend as much on normal fundraising activities and increasing memberships as we would expect to do in a usual year. But as for any organisation, we have very many fixed costs that simply cannot be avoided. And the biggest one of those is, of course, the cost of our staff. Costs which across all cost categories added up to around £4 million last year, just over the half the total amount of money spent, the Trust spent on anything. However, despite the challenges faced by this Trust, very few staff left their jobs because of redundancies last year. But we did, however, furlough up to 70 staff at certain times in the period. more than a third of our workforce and received around about £400,000 in furlough support payments from government as a result of that. Moving on to the next slide, please. As I mentioned previously, the results of our two trading subsidiaries suffered as a result of the pandemic, and this slide shows you by just how much we were hit. Essex Wildlife Sales at the top set of figures and Essex Ecology Services the bottom set. And EWS, the wildlife sales income of only £1 million, was only around 40% of the level achieved in 2019, and that's even after receiving furlough grants for EWF staff of approximately £200,000. Expenditure was a bit lower because the company didn't have to buy items when its sales weren't taking place, but nearly all of its staff were retained. So overall, instead of making a positive contribution to the trust as it did in 2019, this activity lost money in 2020 and had to be supported by the trust's charitable activities. That challenge has continued in the first half of 2021, as you can imagine, because things have only reopened slowly as we got to spring. But now they have reopened, trading has picked up again, and the results have been boosted by the opening of the fabulous Langdon Nature Discovery Centre that Andrew spoke about earlier on. And if you've not been, I really do encourage you to go to see the groundbreaking things we've done there. But please, when you're there, don't forget to buy a cup of tea, because that will help EWS's sales recover just that little bit more. Our other trading company is Essex Ecology Services, our ecological consultancy business, through which we also recorded the income and expenditure of the farm at Abbots Hall, which stopped operating in 2019, as Rich explained earlier. Income from the consultancy activities was down by around about a quarter in 2020, but was still just about enough to cover their direct costs. And the results we're showing there also show the final income and expenditure of the farm accounts, which accounts for most of the surplus last year. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, the trust's assets have grown to over £33 million by the end of 2020. The slide here shows what those assets are made of. That's the pie chart on the left, and how the figures have changed since 2019. That's the bar chart on the right. On the left, what you can see is that fixed assets and long-term investments represent over 3/4 of the value of the trust's assets. And on the right, you can see that fixed assets have grown by around about £2.3 million in the year. And that reflects principally the money spent on the Langdon Nature Discovery Centre, and also the property received from the Stone Hall legacy. Long-term investments are about £1 million higher, mainly as a result of the growth that I mentioned before. But I think the other positive point in this that I'd like to mention is that little dark green bar at the top, the short-term investments in cash. And that's the bar on the right-hand side of the bar chart. They also were up in the year by £500,000 at £3.4 million by the end of the year. So we have plenty of cash in hand to invest for the future and fund our activities if we encounter any new shocks. Next slide, please. This is the other side of the balance sheet, the funds we hold. And over £20 million of our total funds are restricted or endowment funds, which have to be used on the specific purposes for which they were given. But that still leaves almost £13 million in general and designated funds, over which the trust has rather more freedom. And you can see from the bar charts on the right-hand side that most of the increase in funds in 2020 has been in these funds, the general and designated funds. We've been reviewing our policy for using these funds during the course of 2021, and it's quite possible I'll have a little bit more to say about this at next year's AGM. So in concluding my presentation of the results for last year, I'd like to express my sincere thanks to all the support we've received from members and indeed from government. And we've had the financial resources to keep the trust operations running safely. We've delivered our charitable objectives, and we've kept our team together in this most challenging of years. And I'd particularly like to pay tribute to all of our management, staff and volunteers for everything you've done in 2020 and are continuing to do in 2019 for the trust to make this possible. We do not underestimate as trustees, nor I'm sure as members, the personal challenges that many of you have faced and have overcome in the last 19 months to make this happen. So thank you very much indeed. Finally, I should also express my thanks to those who put together the 2020 report and accounts, working remotely for the second year running. That's our interim head of finance and services, Simon Bass, all of his finance team, and also our auditors at Moore Kingston Smith. I'm very pleased to report that the auditors have issued an unqualified report on the 2020 financial statements, which the Board of Trustees approved in June. And yet again, it's been a major achievement by all concerned, so very well done. It only remains for me to propose the resolutions that you see in my final slide, taking items 3 and 4 on the agenda together, the impact report and the audited financial statements for the year ended 31 December 2020 are received. And secondly, that Moore Kingston Smith LLP are reappointed as auditors for the year ended 31st of December 2021, the current year, and the trustees are authorised to agree the auditor's remuneration. So I'll just, in a moment, just hand back to Jules to take you through the voting on those 2 resolutions. Thank you all very much indeed for your attention. I hope you found that informative and most importantly, understandable. And I'll end by expressing the same hope that I did at this time last year, that I'll actually be able to do this in person this time next year. Thanks all very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Bob. That was an excellent summary of the finances, but also all of the work that has gone into keeping the trust in good shape in really troubling times for us all. So just to make the point, we're going to have 2 votes on the recommendations that we have there. We'll take the first of them first. I'd like you to vote on items 3 and 4 on the agenda to receive the impact report and the audited financial statements for the year ended 31st of December 2020. Could you make your vote now on the screen? And we will then report the findings. Okay, thanks very much. That's great. The motion is passed. With the count that we've received today and the proxy form votes, we can confirm that the impact report and financial statement for 2020 have been received by members. So if we could then move on directly to item 5A and B, the second and third of the recommendations from Bob there, the reappointment of the financial auditors. Our treasurer has recommended that we reappoint Moore Kingston Smith and that the trustees be authorisers of their remuneration. So the poll should be launched now. As a member, I agree to reappoint Moore Kingston Smith as auditors for the trust ending the year 31st December 2021, a couple of months' time, and authorise the trustees to agree the remuneration. So if you could cast your vote, I'd be very grateful. Thank you. Splendid. I have the results. You remember those pictures from election nights with people running with boxes? They've been running really fast, and I've got the results, and that's confirmed. So a majority for both those resolutions. Thanks very much indeed. We now move on to item 6 of the agenda, the election of trustees. So there are 4 trustees standing for reappointment at this AGM. Jeff Duffield, Bob Holmes, Charles Johnson, Michelle Wall. I think you've got the picture there on screen that should be brought up to be full screen so that we can see the people. You may remember last year that the trust recruited 6 new trustees onto the board. Constitution requires that a proportion of serving members stand down, and we therefore have taken Jeff, Bob, Charles and Michelle to stand for re-election. Their biographies have been detailed on the website, and we hope you'll support the board by accepting their commendation to reappoint these individuals who are also members and also have an important responsibility to oversee the management of the organisation. Again, as you've heard from both Andrew and Bob. So we've got the collage of the trustees here. 4 trustees, 4 vacancies. So I suggest in the interest of time, we vote for all 4 trustees en bloc. So I'd like to launch poll 4 then. A simple resolution here. As member, I approve the reappointment of the 4 trustees: Jeff Duffield, Bob Holmes, Charles Johnson, Michelle Wall. Please cast your vote. Okay, thank you. I can confirm that that resolution has been passed. So now that concludes actually the section of the AGM. Though having confirmed that these trustees are duly re-elected to serve as trustees to the board of Essex Wildlife Trust, that concludes the ordinary business of the meeting. We've just got one item of special business for the AGM before we come to questions, and this concerns the vote to reappoint our independent scrutineer for a further 12 months. So Penny Carter acts as our independent counter and arbitrator for voting. She's checked and verified our proxy voting for the last 3 years and has agreed to fulfill this role again for another year. And thank you, Penny, for that. So what I'd like to do is to launch our final poll. So as a member, I agree to reappoint Penny Carter as scrutineer for the trust for a further 12 months. So if you could, again, cast your vote, that would be very welcome. Thank you. Okay, thanks very much, everybody. We can confirm that members have voted in favour of the appointment of the scrutineer. There is a question in the Q&A from Elizabeth H, who has said, I don't object to any reappointments, but feel it's wrong in principle to have to vote en bloc. We have done this in the past, but what we're going to be doing is to give details of the answers to questions that we don't have time for or that require further information on the website. So we will come back to that, but it has been common practice in the past where we've had the same number of vacancies or reappointment opportunities and the same number of people standing, including in the 3-dimensional world opportunities when we were able to meet together. So it's not an innovation for this AGM, but your point is taken. So thank you. I can confirm that we have a scrutineer for the further 12-month term. Thank you, Penny. We're very grateful to you. So that concludes the formal business of the AGM. And what I'd like to do now is to use the remaining few minutes to pick up on some of the questions that have been posed beforehand to the trust. And there are, as you can see with the Q&A at the bottom there, opportunities for asking questions here. We can pick those up, but if we run out of time, we will address them afterwards. I'll come to that point. So this is me asking Andrew questions. So we are simulating being in the real world, as it were, where we would take questions from the audience or take questions from proxy forms. So I'm going to begin with a number of proxy ones, then come to these ones online first of all. So I have a question from Emily Scrivener, who is asking about disabled access. And she says that the Boma wheelchair, Andrew, at Aberton is incredible. Would it be possible to have a roving Boma wheelchair that visits different reserves for a time period like the ponies do? She says, I can't expect one at each centre, but could it be advertised in the magazine so that more people know about it, as it's such an asset to the trust? Many thanks. So that's a question and a kind comment around the Boma wheelchair at Aberton.
Yeah,
Andrew.
Thanks, Emily. I'm so pleased to hear that you love the wheelchair. It is amazing. For those of you that don't know about it, it's an electronic all-terrain wheelchair, and it's incredible when you see it. The chair in question was actually funded by the Rights of Way Committee, and this was given to them by Essex and Suffolk Water for the local community. So the money for that chair, I mean, they're not cheap, they're about £13,000, so they're an amazing piece of kit, but the money actually came from the development of expanding the reservoir. So it was for local people, really. So we would have to ask permission to get that moved. But what I do think is an alternative is actually we should potentially look to fundraise for a roving wheelchair, because I love your idea of having that wheelchair that roves around the county and publicising where it goes. So I think probably fundraising for a new one that we actually are able to move would be a better option. But great idea, and I love the fact that you're loving it.
Splendid. Second question comes from Linda Wenlock. In these unsettled times, have board members who joined last year had the opportunity to meet, engage and get to know members of staff? I realise this may have been hard, but feel it is an important aspect of being a trustee. Well, certainly an important aspect of being in life in general. But Andrew, perhaps you can just tell us a little bit about how the trust has gone about doing this, keeping the connectedness up high.
Yeah. Hi, Lynn. Thanks for the question. Lovely to hear from you. The new trustees haven't actually met in person. I mean, I myself, I haven't sat at my desk for 20 months now, and it's been very difficult. We've all been working from home, so I haven't met many of the new trustees, either because of COVID restrictions or because they have work commitments, because a lot of our new trustees are actually working members. But I would say that those new trustees and all of the existing trustees have met so many of the staff on either Zoom calls or team calls, either through committees, through specialist working groups, or indeed at the height of COVID, we were meeting as a board every fortnight. So a couple of times a month. So there's been many opportunities for those trustees to meet many staff. Some of them have met in person, but in general, it's been over Zoom. But there's been a lot of connectivity. In fact, you know, if you'd have asked us 2 years ago whether the trust would have functioned, we'd have probably said, no, we can't do it remotely. It's been incredible. The connection has been fantastic. So I think it's actually been better.
Splendid. Andrew is sort of finishing quickly without kind of giving me a signal that he's about to finish. So that was a good answer there. I've got a comment rather than a question. Well done from Catherine Welch, who says, well done and thank you to all of those who have worked on and opened visitor centres and sites as soon as you could over the last year. Again, we know that it's been challenging, as Andrew has said. So thank you, Catherine, for that comment. I'll pick up a couple of other questions from registrations. A question from John Lynch, who asks, I understand Essex Wildlife Trust will no longer be recording wildlife in Essex. Can you explain the reason for this and how it will be carried out in future? So, Andrew, this is one of those questions that probably opens up lots of bigger issues. We can have a more comprehensive answer on the website to answer John, but certainly if you could give a summary now, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, John. We can give, this is very complex and we'll give you a full answer online as Jules is suggesting, but I think you're referring to the Biological Record Centre. Firstly, John, let me reassure you, we have definitely not stopped recording wildlife. If anything, we've actually started recording more wildlife on our sites. We've got a new ecological monitoring programme and we're looking at all of our sites so that we can look at the condition of our sites and we can actually say with confidence that we're having an impact. So we're doing more wildlife recording. What we have ceased is providing commercial biological data to consultants and other organisations because we feel that Essex needs a standalone environmental record centre, a local record centre, and we are calling now on Essex County Council to administer this through a local nature partnership. Essex is the only county in England that doesn't have a local nature partnership. And we believe that that's wrong and that the council need to step up and do that. And then they are in a much better position to join all of our records with the field club records and actually have that standalone local environment record centre, which is delivering for wildlife and nature protection. So that in essence is what we're doing, but we certainly haven't stopped recording wildlife.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Andrew. The next question is from Darren Parker. Can more be done to ensure that there are plenty of vegan offerings in visitor centres, coffee shops, and in restaurants? And you remember I said earlier on about the carbon savings. A vegetarian diet saves around about 0.7 of a tonne per year. A vegan diet saves about 0.9 of a tonne of carbon per year. So, Andrew, what are we doing about food at the centres?
Good question, Darren. Really, really timely. And yes, the plan is definitely to do more vegan food. Absolutely. We've already got that proposal written and that aspiration written in our new food and beverage strategy so that we are a responsible catering provider going forward. We understand everything that Jules picked up on his talk. Food is so important in terms of sustainability. We already have a vegan menu, full vegan menu at our new Nature Discovery Centre at Langdon. So we're trialling that. And currently the majority of our sites have specialist vegan items such as maybe vegan cakes or something. But of course we can do more. I will be honest, over the last 20 months, just keeping the doors open and of late, actually just staffing things because of the issues around COVID has been a challenge. So the priority really over the last couple of years is just actually keeping the doors open and keeping the wheels moving. But yes, very much vegan food is definitely part of our strategy going forward, and we will be looking to do more and more in the months ahead for sure.
Great, thanks very much, Andrew. A question from a certain John Hall, known well to all in this parish. And John has asked us also about carbon. Has Essex Wildlife Trust achieved any reduction in the carbon emissions of the charity in the last year or in the last 5 years? Well, the last year has been an odd one, as we all know. But perhaps, Andrew, you can tell us a bit about how we're approaching carbon footprints and what we know to this point. Thanks very much.
Definitely. Yes, thank you, John. Lovely to hear from you as ever. It's a great question. We've definitely seen a reduction over the last couple of years in carbon. That's for sure. But I would suggest, hands up, the majority of that obviously is due to a consequence of COVID and the reduction in operations. However, we have began measuring carbon. We started to do that in 2019, and this was using the Wildlife Trust carbon calculator. We actually received a grant of £20,000 from the People Postcode Lottery to enable us to do that. So that was fantastic. And as part of that work, we did a really full, comprehensive, independent environmental review. And this is now feeding into our sustainability accreditation work. This is a program with Green Dragon. And I'm really proud to say that we've already been accredited level 1 out of 5 levels. So first level, and this is based on the organisation's commitment, the board's commitment, my own personal commitment to sustainability and throughout the organisation. And Essex Wildlife Trust is the first of all of the 46 wildlife trusts to go through this accreditation process. And it's fantastic that we've already got level 1 accreditation. And monitoring carbon will be a key aspect of that work going forward. And we'll have quarterly reporting against that. So we can start to see when we return to the new normal, because we will have a new normal and it won't be like 2019. So we'll have to kind of re-baseline 2021 for that new working and the hybrid model. But once we've re-baselined that carbon data for 2021, then we can start to see how we're going forward. So yeah, definitely a big part of what we're doing and a big focus of our attention.
Absolutely, and should be for all organisations in the coming years, as I hinted. That's great. Thank you, Andrew. John Coombe Tennant has got a question about sheep on meadows at Rabness. And he said, my sheep graze your meadows at Rabness. It's very soft ground, too boggy for cattle, but fine for sheep. However, the deep ponds you scraped in the fields last year are dangerous for livestock. Can something be done to make them safer, such as grading the banks or wire fencing? So a specific question, but an important one for a particular habitat, and also for the challenge of making new habitats. Indeed.
So thank you, John, great question. Always want to support our grazers. Really difficult to get grazers, so we want to work with you. The area I think in question is a wet grassland with a series of scrapes, and it's got a central ditch running through it. The banks of these features have been deliberately graded, so they actually have very shallow gradient on the edges because we want them specifically for feeding waders. So the banks are quite shallow. We wouldn't consider putting fencing in to fence off these areas because there are other areas that are less wet. And actually the fencing would incur kind of additional cost for us to stop us doing kind of conservation work, and also it would provide posts for avian predators, so we don't want that. But we are very happy to accommodate kind of electric fencing from you as a grazier, if we're happy to do this at your own cost. So we're happy for the electric fencing to go in, and obviously we would want to support anything to ensure that the best possible practice for animal welfare solutions are found. So we can definitely work with you on site because there are drier areas on that site, but we've created those wet grassland and those scrapes specifically for wildlife, and that's why they've been put in.
Thank you, Andrew. Great stuff. A couple more questions to go before we just point towards the ones that we've received today. From Chris Davis about Abbots Hall. Are there any plans to reopen the grounds of Abbots Hall to members? Well, I'm sure there are plans, but I suppose it's, when might it happen and under what conditions? Abbots Hall and its grounds.
Yeah, you've already heard from Rich this morning about the amazing vision that we have for Abbots Hall. Technically, it's still closed at the minute. We're just about thinking about starting to transition staff back over the next few weeks. Don't forget, it's been closed for over 18 months now, so we've had no staff there really. So just starting to open it up. We also have our brand new nature nursery there, which is just starting to bed in. That's only a matter of days or at least a couple of weeks open. So we're certainly not going to open Abbots Hall this side of Christmas, I'm afraid, not to the public. We've got things that need to happen. We need to get our operational ducks in order before we can start opening that up. But as I said, Rich has described the vision. We obviously need to think about how public access will affect or complement those plans. So in the new year, we'll give a chance to be able to communicate where we are with public access. But obviously, I want the public to be able to access it to see, but we need to make sure that that's not going to get in the way of any of that planning. But as soon as we've got plans in the new year, we'll let you know.
That's super. And I think we're all pretty mindful of what the national data looks like on COVID infections. We may have plans and may need to reverse them if things start to get worse again. Who knows? We're certainly not out of it at the moment. And it's likely to have an impact upon access to reserves and other sites for some time to come, I rather suspect. A question from Gordon Evans. And it's actually quite a big one, but it's really about the annual payments that we make to the RSWT, the Central Organisation for the Wildlife Trusts. So he's noting that other wildlife trusts in East Anglia reduced their annual contributions by 2 to 7% from Norfolk and Suffolk for the financial year ending March 2021. He said, can members expect to see a similar reduction from Essex? Are trustees of the trust content that the annual contribution made to RSWT is good value on the face of it? And are we content? I think he's slightly discontent that there's only a small amount of information in the consolidated financial statements about the contribution made to RSWT. His specific point at the end, what will the directors and trustees do to adjust this lack of transparency? So I think he's just concerned about a little bit more information. This looks like a question that could do with answering in full on the website, but perhaps you can just give a couple of headline principles about the kind of governance structure of the wildlife trusts and how we help to maintain the centre and the contributions that we make from Essex.
Indeed. I'll try and be brief. This is a really good question, Gordon, and a full answer will go online, as Jules is suggesting, but I'll try and be as succinct as possible. So just there are 46 wildlife trusts. That creates the Wildlife Trust Movement, DWT, but there's a central charity, the Royal Society of Wildlife Trusts, who support all of those 46 wildlife trusts, and we contribute to fund that. So the contribution for RSWT is based on an algorithm of unrestricted income, of subsidiary donations and unrestricted investment income. And then that's averaged over the last 5 years. So I've spoken to my colleagues in Suffolk and Norfolk, and they haven't gone to RSWT and say we want to pay less. It's literally because their income has dropped in 2020, and therefore the algorithm worked out that they had to pay less because they had less money than they did the previous year. So if we had more money than the previous year, we will actually pay just a tiny bit more. So it's the algorithm that's working it out, nothing else associated with that. In terms of the appropriateness of it, and I mean, you asked specifically about the trustees. I'm not a trustee, and I'm sure Bob would step in if I misappropriate anything, but just to say that the board have had a discussion about the contribution. It is a significant amount of money, but we decided that there's a lot of change going on at the minute. RSWT have got a new CEO that's come in, the ex-CEO of Friends of the Earth, very inspiring character and is doing great things. We also, through COVID, had some of our sister wildlife trusts that were threatened with folding, literally not going forward. They had no money. So we felt from an Essex point of view, we had a responsibility to the movement at this stage to kind of continue to support the charity going forward, the national charity. Also, we've got, the Environment Bill, we've got COP26. There's a lot going on at the minute. So we felt it was important to give Craig Bennett, the new CEO, that opportunity to develop his new strategy. So now wasn't the time to actually pull the plug on that. That new strategy is going to go to the AGM in November, the RSWT AGM, and there Essex Wildlife Trust will have an opportunity to vote on that and also to agree a new contribution model. And your final point, Gordon, in terms of, you noted that the contribution is noted in the report and consolidated financial statements, but you're right, maybe not all members do read that in detail. And therefore, I think, as I've just described, there'll be a new strategy. And I think that's a perfect opportunity for us to highlight the role of the movement, the role of RSWT, the value that EWT gets from it, the cost, the vital part that Essex Wildlife Trust plays in that. And we can really talk loud and proud about that. So I think, full transparency is at the heart of our financial planning and also of our reporting. So if there is anything more to be done in terms of that transparency, I'm sure the board and the Fundraising and Audit Committee will address that going forward, and will be very open about where that money is going and why they believe that it is so important.
Thank you, Andrew. Splendid. So just going to pick up on the questions that have been asked this morning. It is 12:36. We'll finish this section in just 2 or 3 minutes before we go to the final item, which is about the Ray Marsh Award. So we don't want to keep you waiting too long, but let's just rattle through these as well. Pamela asked us, why do we no longer get the local insert to the magazine that tells what our local group is doing over the next few months? Andrew, have we got something on that?
The newsletter is now really incorporated and integrated within the magazine. So local groups are now really at the heart of the magazine and at the heart of that communication. So that's great. So it's not just an insert, it's a big part of it. And also it was to reduce costs, reduce paper, reduce carbon, everything associated with that sustainability. So we didn't want to waste the paper, where it's now embedded within the magazine.
Great, thank you. I should say that some of the other questions have been answered. So if you click on the top of the bar on the questions and answer, you'll find answers there if you have asked a question. A member asked, are there plans for increasing staffing at Hanningfield Reserve? I've noticed that school visits have not been possible this term. Well, that there may be lots of reasons for that. So there are kind of two elements to this.
Yeah, there's lots of reasons.
Staffing at Hanningfield, yeah.
Lots of reasons which we don't have to go into now, but COVID has been a real challenge, for so many reasons. It's been really, really difficult. Recruitment has been and is currently a real challenge, both in two areas, specifically food and beverage and education. It's an absolute nightmare to recruit. But yes, the plan is definitely to recruit more people in education. Specifically, Hanningfield is one of those sites. So we are trying to recruit in those areas, definitely, because education is a fundamental part of what we're doing.
Elizabeth, we replied to you, and thank you for that. That's great. Graham Mee asked, how will the Essex Wildlife Trust compensate for the loss of EU funding? Yes, okay, big one.
Good question, very good question. I don't think we have an answer to that at the minute, if I'm honest. It's a challenge. We have to quantify that is the first thing. I think we have to understand exactly how much funding are we going to lose, how material is that? And then I think we need to throw the challenge at ourselves as to how we will cover that. And we might need to throw the challenge at the government as well, as to how they think that they're going to challenge that, whether that's going to be through the new payment system, the new ELM system, or whether it's going to be, wrapped up in some kind of something that the Treasurer is going to announce. So it's a great question, one which I can't really give you an answer to. But as I said, first and foremost, I think we need to quantify just how serious that is.
Yeah, lots of sectors are waiting for further information at the moment, aren't they? So we have a couple of further comments that were in the questions. Actually, I see that some are being answered as indeed we speak. I think the final open question was from Josie Close, who asked about the Essex Coastal Challenge having been highlighted by John Story. What are the trust plans to assist local NGOs, charities, third sector in support of slowing the erosion at the Naze and to protect the salt lagoons? Okay, is there anything we can say about that?
So at the Naze, we've certainly got plans. I've had conversations with Tendridge District Council, with many of the parish councillors there, with the Environment Agency, with Anglian Water there at the Naze specifically. So there are plans afoot. We're going to support them wherever we can, either from an ecological point of view or from our experience previously with the Crag Walk, or with our coastal knowledge, either at Abbots Hall Farm or at Fingering-Hoe. So yes, we're talking to them both from a fundraising point of view, from a project management point of view, from an ecological point of view. So we're definitely having those conversations, and we're at the heart of those conversations. I can assure you there.
Thank you very much. Well, that's all the questions. We've covered everything. We have undertaken to give a bit more detail on a couple of those, so that will come back on the website in due course. Thank you very much, everybody, for your questions, for your engagement, for your voting. That formally ends the AGM and my part of the chairing. So I now hand back to Andrew who's going to introduce the Ray Marsh Award and lead us in the last kind of 2 or 3 minutes to the end of this part of the meeting today. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Jules. Thanks for that. I enjoyed that. We'll chat again, same time next year, I hope. Hopefully face to face next time. That would be lovely if we could do that. But thank you so much, Jules, as our president, for guiding us through the AGM so seamlessly as always. So thank you. Yes, as Jules said, my final task today is a great one. It's my chance to announce basically our volunteer award for 2021. You will remember in 2019 we honoured Ray Marsh, who had been for 60 years, 6 decades, he'd been the warden at Skipper's Island, going across in his little rowing boat. Quite phenomenal, very humbling, an amazing man. And we wanted to give an award, and therefore we gave him an award, and it was the Ray Marsh Award, basically. But we thought, well, it's a lovely award, but I want to do something more going forward. So I decided that we will have a Ray Marsh Award in his name going forward. Last year, John Thorogood was the recipient, who'd done incredible work as well, an amazing volunteer. And I have to say, we are blessed with an unbelievable army of volunteers. It's quite incredible, almost 2,000 volunteers, a phenomenal resource. We, in the same way as I say with members, we could not do what we do without our volunteers. They're absolutely incredible, donating their time, which, as I've said before, sometimes, not for everyone, but sometimes donating time is harder than donating money because we're all so busy. So for them to donate their time is quite incredible. So I'm sad that I can only recognise one volunteer, but unfortunately there's only one Ray Marsh Award. I can't give out 50 of them a year. But I'm delighted to say that this year in 2021, the Ray Marsh Award goes to Jill Jordan. Now, Jill is an incredible person, quite phenomenal. I've known of Jill since I was a wee small boy, because she was fundraising back then. Many years ago, when I used to go to the RSBB Chelmsford local group, she was there and she was fundraising, and she's an incredible person. She has been working at Hanningfield as a volunteer for the last 20 years and doing incredible things, 2 or 3 days a week, every year for 20 years, Jill's been there. We believe that even this year alone, Jill has greeted up to 20,000 people herself. She's greeted 20,000 people just at Hanningfield. Quite phenomenal. We've actually added up and quantified her input over the last 2 decades, and we believe it's in the field of £170,000 worth of staff time. £170,000 worth of staff time, just Jill, in the work that she's done. So quite amazing. But it's not just about the figures with Jill. It's not just about, the numbers. It's about the way she does things. It's the way she presents herself. It's the way that she's an ambassador for the trust. She role models our values perfectly. She engages with other volunteers. She coaches them. Her passion for wildlife is incredible. Her smiley face, nothing is ever too much trouble. So, the behaviors of that individual is something to be celebrated as much as the numbers. So I'm really thrilled to say that this year's Ray Marsh Award winner is Jill Jordan down at Hanningfield Reservoir. So well done, Jill. And hopefully next time we're face to face, we can give her a massive round of applause if she's in the marquee. But that's just a little picture of me and Justin, the site manager, going down earlier this week to surprise her. And we did surprise her. It was brilliant. For those of you old enough, it was a bit like This Is Your Life. Me jumping out the bushes and surprising her. But it was wonderful to go and make a fuss of her and to say thank you. So well done, Jill. An incredible award and thoroughly well deserved. So, ladies and gents, that's it. I think we've reached the end of today's proceedings. Thank you for all of those of you who have stuck with us from 10 o'clock. A massive thank you to so many people. Just quickly, thank you to Jules and Bob for contributions today, significant contributions, making things so either clear or so inspiring. So a huge thank you to them. Thank you for Storm Events, who have been hosting this online event, taking the pressure away from me largely. So thank you to Storm Events. Thank you to all of my presenters today, all of the organisers behind the scenes. There's far too many for me to mention, and I'd probably forget someone. So I'm just going to say thank you to all of those who have been organising. You know who you are, so thank you to them. Thank you to all of the staff. This has been a really tough 18 months. I don't want to kind of overstate it. I'm sure it's been tough for you guys as well as it has been for us. It has been really tough. So thank you to all of the staff for getting us through this time. All of the volunteers, some of them who are really frustrated when we said, no, you can't come and help us because we can't because of COVID, but you've stuck with us. all of the trustees who are obviously volunteers themselves, but the trustees who have led the organisation through these really, really challenging times and have met very regularly to get through this rocky passage. So thank you to them. And the final thank you, obviously, to you guys, the members. And that's the really important one today. This has been a celebration of your engagement with the trust and your contribution to the trust. I said it's been challenging, but with your enduring support, we've been able to, I guess, rise to those challenges this year. And that's what it's really all about. After all, this does remain the most important decade for wildlife going forward. It's really, really fundamental. And therefore, we need your support going forward. It's fundamental that you continue to support us, that you continue to be inspired, that you continue to tell all of your friends about what we do and why what we do is so important and get them involved. We each have to play our part going forward. It's not just down to the trust, and it's not just down to you. We need 1 in 4 people taking action for wildlife, and therefore we need everyone inspired about nature. If we do that, then we will get a wilder Essex, and then we will get a county rich in wildlife with people connected to nature. So thank you so much for your support. It really means so much. It's fundamental. Thank you for engaging today. I hope you've had a wonderful morning. Have a great rest of the weekend. Stay wild and stay safe. Thank you.